Picture this: a woman who spent 20 years clawing her way from the most hated figure in Britain to Queen Consort, who endured decades of public venom and came out the other side wearing a crown, just had that crown ripped off her head in 72 hours. Not because of an affair, not because of a fight caught on camera. Because an auditor in a basement office noticed £5,000 a month flowing to a shell company in Luxembourg that nobody could explain. And when investigators pulled that thread, what unraveled was not a bookkeeping error. It was a web of hidden accounts in Switzerland, in the Cayman Islands, in Luxembourg, holding nearly £9 million that King Charles III had no idea existed. His wife had been hiding millions from him for their entire marriage every single year, while he publicly championed her, while he begged the nation to accept her, while he staked his personal credibility on her character. Stay with me on this one, because buried inside this scandal is a connection to Prince Andrew that makes everything worse, and a constitutional crisis that has not happened in Britain since the abdication of Edward VIII in 1936. I am going to walk you through the full timeline, the confrontation that happened behind closed doors at Clarence House, and the question that Charles asked Camilla that shattered everything. Let us start with the morning that changed everything. December the 3rd, 2025, 6:47 in the morning, London time. Most of the country is still asleep. The newspapers have not hit doorsteps yet. Social media is quiet. And Buckingham Palace drops a statement that reads like a detonation, not the usual careful diplomatic language you expect from royal communications. Not the kind of statement where you need a decoder ring to figure out what they are actually saying. This one was blunt. The palace announced that King Charles III had formally requested parliamentary action regarding the titles and status of Camilla Parker Bowles. They used her pre-marriage name. That detail alone told you everything. When the palace refers to someone by a name they no longer officially hold, they are telling you that person is already gone in every way that matters. The statement said serious financial irregularities and undisclosed accounts had been discovered, and that continuing the Queen Consort title was no longer appropriate. Think about what that sentence means. The King of England publicly accused his own wife of financial misconduct and asked Parliament to strip her titles. At 6:47 in the morning, before anyone could spin it, before anyone could soften it, before any communications team could massage the language into something survivable, he wanted it out there raw. And that timing tells you something about his state of mind that no official statement ever could. Here is the part most people miss about this story. Everyone focuses on the accounts, the money, the drama, but the truly extraordinary thing is the speed. Financial scandals inside institutions like the British monarchy do not move like this. They take months. Lawyers review documents for weeks. Communications, strategists, craft messaging, stakeholders are consulted. By the time anything goes public, it has been sanded down into something manageable. That is how institutions survive. They absorb shocks slowly. This was the opposite. 5 days. 5 days from Charles learning about these accounts to Camilla being legally stripped of titles she had spent 2 decades earning. 5 days from discovery to the most severe punishment the crown can inflict short of criminal prosecution. That is not institutional caution. That is fury dressed up in constitutional language. And from what we now know about what happened behind closed doors, it was both overwhelming evidence and a level of personal betrayal so deep that it overrode every instinct toward careful management. But we need to rewind, because the thing that set all of this in motion was genuinely boring, and that is what makes it brilliant, in a dark sort of way. In May of 2025, Parliament passed legislation requiring enhanced financial transparency for senior members of the royal family who receive public funding. This was not aimed at anyone specifically. It was the kind of modernization push that governments love to announce. Public pressure for accountability had been building for years. People wanted to know where taxpayer money went. Independent audits, full disclosure of assets, quarterly reporting of significant transactions, standard governance reforms that honestly should have been in place decades ago. The audit firm that won the contract was called Reynolds Partners. They began their work in September of 2025, starting with the most senior figures. The king first, then the queen consort's office. And here is where you need to understand something about how the queen consort's finances were supposed to work. She received an allowance from the Duchy of Lancaster. She had some personal wealth from her previous marriage settlement. Standard household expenses, properly documented. Nobody expected to find anything worth a second look. Her finances were supposed to be the boring part of the audit. And then, an auditor named Sarah Mitchell noticed something. I want you to pause on that name for a second. Sarah Mitchell, not a senior partner, not a celebrity forensic accountant, brought in to investigate corruption. A working auditor doing her job in October of 2025, reviewing payment authorizations, probably drinking terrible office coffee, going through line items the way she had done hundreds of times before. And she noticed monthly payments going to what appeared to be a financial management firm in Luxembourg, about £5,000 a month. Not enormous sums, not the kind of number that sets off immediate alarms, but they were not properly categorized in the palace accounting system. Now, if you have ever worked in auditing or compliance or any kind of financial oversight, you know what happens next. Mitchell requested documentation explaining these payments. The responses came back vague. Something about estate management services. No specifics, no contracts, no clear deliverables. And if you know anything about how financial concealment works, you know that vague answers to specific questions are not just unhelpful. They are a signal. They are the thing that tells a good auditor to start digging. Mitchell followed protocol and requested direct communication with the Luxembourg firm. What she found made her stomach drop. The entity was not managing any legitimate estates connected to Camilla. It was a shell company. Its primary function was receiving funds from various sources and distributing them to accounts held in Camilla's name across multiple jurisdictions. The shell company itself was owned by another corporate entity registered in the British Virgin Islands, layers of corporate structure designed specifically to obscure who owned what and where money was going. That is not how you manage an inherited family property. That is how you hide money. Once Mitchell escalated to her senior partners at Reynolds and the palace was notified, forensic accountants got involved. And the picture did not just expand, it exploded. 3 separate accounts at banks in Geneva and Zurich opened between 2003 and 2005, combined balances of approximately £3.2 million. Transaction history showing regular deposits from various sources, some from British entities, others routed through jurisdictions specifically chosen to make tracing difficult. Withdrawals were minimal, which told investigators these accounts were built for accumulation, not spending. Somebody was stockpiling. Then the Cayman Islands accounts, opened in 2007, shortly after Camilla married Charles, containing over £4 million. The source of funds appeared to be primarily transfers originating in the United Kingdom, but routed through intermediate accounts that obscured their origins. And here is the detail that turns a scandal into something much worse. Deposits had continued regularly through 2024. This was not old money from before the marriage that someone forgot to mention. This was ongoing activity throughout Camilla's entire time as Duchess of Cornwall and then Queen Consort. Active concealment carried out year after year after year. Luxembourg held the third cluster, approximately £1.3 million. This account appeared to serve as a collection point. Smaller payments from various sources would land here, then get distributed outward to the Swiss accounts and the Cayman accounts. The structure was sophisticated. Somebody had thought carefully about how to move money in ways that would not draw attention. And I need you to understand something. That kind of planning does not happen by accident. You do not accidentally set up shell companies in the British Virgin Islands. You do not accidentally open accounts across 3 different offshore jurisdictions. You do not accidentally route payments through collection points designed to obscure where money is coming from. This requires intent. This requires professional assistance. This requires someone who knew exactly what they were doing and why. Now, here is where the story takes a turn that nobody expected. And this is the part that transforms a financial scandal into something that threatens the entire institution. When investigators started tracing where the money actually came from, the patterns got ugly. Some deposits appeared to originate from wealthy individuals with connections to Prince Andrew's social circle. Several of these individuals had been associated with controversial figures or businesses already under investigation for financial irregularities of their own. Other deposits traced back to companies operating in sectors where a royal connection might provide significant business advantage. Nobody has proven direct pay for access arrangements. Let me be clear about that. But the timing of certain deposits relative to events that Camilla hosted, causes she advocated for, introductions she may have facilitated, the patterns made investigators deeply uncomfortable. When you see a deposit of significant size arrive in a hidden offshore account within weeks of a royal charity gala attended by the depositor, you do not need a conviction to understand what the shape of that relationship looks like. And then there is Andrew. The timing of certain deposits into Camilla's accounts corresponded with periods when Prince Andrew was known to be desperately seeking funds to cover legal expenses or settlement costs related to his own scandals. No direct transfers between Andrew and Camilla have been proven, but the circumstantial timing suggested possible coordination or shared financial strategies. That is an extremely polite way of saying the money trail looks like Camilla might have been helping Andrew move money around in ways that would not show up in official records. Let me put this in perspective for you. Prince Andrew is the family member whose scandals have done more damage to the House of Windsor than anything since the abdication crisis. His association with Jeffrey Epstein, his legal settlement, his removal from public duties, these are the wounds the monarchy has been trying to heal for years. And now, investigators were looking at evidence suggesting that the Queen Consort, the woman who was supposed to represent the monarchy's fresh start and rehabilitation, might have been secretly entangled in the financial chaos surrounding the family's most toxic member. If you designed a nightmare scenario for the British monarchy in a laboratory, you could not do much worse than this. Princess Anne was brought into the investigation in mid-November of 2025, when palace officials realized the scope had extended beyond simple undisclosed assets into potentially criminal territory. Anne's reaction, according to people briefed on the investigation, was horror. She understood immediately that this was not just hidden money. This was a structure designed to conceal ongoing financial activity from the family, from palace officials, and from authorities. That level of planning pointed to consciousness of wrongdoing, not innocent oversight. Anne's involvement mattered enormously because she initially leaned toward handling everything quietly, contain the damage, manage the fallout privately, avoid a public scandal that could tear the family apart. But as the investigation kept revealing more, as the extent of concealment became clear, as the troubling sources of funds kept multiplying, Anne reached a conclusion that changed everything. Protecting the institution required transparency, even if that transparency meant destroying her brother's marriage and ending Camilla's position as Queen Consort. The family's private interests had to yield to the Crown's public obligations. Prince William was briefed on November the 25th, 3 days before Charles would learn the full truth. Palace legal counsel walked him through the documentation, the account structures, the timeline, the potential implications. William's immediate concern was not about Camilla. His first question was whether his father might be implicated, whether Charles could have known about the accounts and failed to disclose them, whether the king himself might be entangled. The investigation found no evidence that Charles knew, but William recognized something equally dangerous. The question would inevitably be raised publicly. In managing that perception, convincing the British people that the king had genuinely been kept in the dark about millions hidden by his own wife would be almost as difficult as managing the scandal itself. Charles was informed on November the 28th, and those present described it as one of the most difficult briefings of his entire reign. Senior advisors presented him with documentation, the accounts, the amounts, the timeline of their creation, the mysterious sources of funding. Charles's initial reaction was disbelief. He kept insisting there must be innocent explanations, administrative errors, misunderstandings, old family money that had not been properly updated. But as he reviewed the evidence page by page, the reality became unavoidable. The woman he had loved for decades, the woman he had sacrificed his first marriage for, the woman he had spent years rehabilitating in the public eye, had been concealing wealth from him for their entire relationship. And then he asked the question that, according to those present, made the room go silent. He said she had been hiding millions from him throughout their entire marriage. That while he had been defending her publicly, supporting her rehabilitation, trusting her completely, she had been concealing wealth he did not know existed. His voice was hollow when he said it. Not angry yet, just hollow. The confrontation happened that same evening at Clarence's house. I want you to picture this scene because the physical details matter. Charles dismissed his private secretary. He sent away his most trusted aides. Only 2 protection officers remained within calling distance, which was standard security protocol that could not be waived regardless of the circumstances. When Camilla entered the study at 7:15 in the evening, she knew something was wrong, but she did not know the full scope. Charles was sitting behind his desk, not in the informal seating area where they usually talked, behind the desk, creating a physical barrier between them that was as much emotional as architectural. And on that desk, he had laid out financial documentation. Bank statements, account opening records, transaction histories, corporate structures, all of it printed and organized chronologically. He did not speak at first. He just gestured for her to look. That silence was deliberate. He later told William that the silence was because he genuinely wanted to believe there was an explanation. He was giving her a chance. He was hoping she would look at the papers and say something, anything, that would make the last 20 years make sense again. Camilla's initial response was denial, not of the accounts themselves. She could not deny documents sitting in front of her, but denial of wrongdoing. She insisted these were old accounts from before their marriage, family money she had kept separate, nothing that needed to be disclosed, normal private wealth management, the kind of thing everyone does. But Charles pushed. He pointed to transaction dates clearly showing activity throughout their marriage. Deposits made while she was Duchess of Cornwall. Deposits made after she became Queen Consort. Activity that could not possibly be explained away as old family money sitting forgotten in some account. And as he pushed, the denials became less confident, more defensive. The answers got shorter. The pauses got longer. The turning point came when Charles confronted her with evidence of connections to individuals in Prince Andrew's orbit, timing that suggested coordination during Andrew's financial crisis. Patterns that looked like something far beyond simple private savings. He asked her directly, what was she involved in? Because this did not look like savings. It looked like receiving payments for influence. It looked like money laundering. It looked like something that could destroy the monarchy. And that is when Camilla's composure broke. She insisted she had been protecting the family, that Andrew had come to her years ago, desperate for help with his financial troubles, that she had been trying to assist him without involving Charles in situations that would have forced him to choose between his brother and propriety. The accounts had been Andrew's idea, she said. Ways to receive and hold funds without a direct connection to him. Money would flow through her accounts before it could be moved to pay his debts or cover his legal expenses. Think about what that admission means for a moment. If it is true, Camilla was complicit in potentially illegal financial schemes designed to help Prince Andrew evade accountability. She was a conduit for money that needed to be hidden. If it is false, she was throwing Andrew under the bus to save herself, blaming someone already disgraced to deflect from her own choices. Either way, it confirmed the worst fears of everyone in that investigation. Charles asked the question that mattered most to him personally. Did she marry him with these accounts already in place? Was she already hiding this from him on their wedding day? Camilla's answer was hesitant, qualified, full of pauses, but it amounted to yes. She had had some of the accounts before they married, had opened others afterward. But she had never told him because she knew he would have insisted they be disclosed or closed, and she had felt obligated to help Andrew in ways Charles could not officially support. That justification apparently made Charles angrier than the concealment itself. He told her she had made him complicit in her deception. Every time he defended her publicly, every time he supported her rehabilitation, every time he told the British people to trust her, he was vouching for someone who was lying to him about fundamental aspects of her life. He asked if she understood what she had done to his credibility, to the institution he had spent his entire life preparing to lead. Camilla tried to argue that the amounts were not enormous by royal standards, that no public money was involved, that she had never used her position for personal enrichment, only to help family. Charles cut through those arguments with what witnesses later described as devastating precision. He told her the amount did not matter. Whether the source was public funds did not matter. What mattered was that she had concealed millions in assets, she had potentially received money from suspicious sources, and she had lied to him about it for years. That was not a family matter. That was institutional liability. The conversation deteriorated from there. Recriminations, emotional outbursts, voices raised to a volume that palace staff outside the door could hear even if they could not distinguish the words. When Camilla finally emerged 3 hours later, staff reported she looked shattered. She went directly to her private apartments without speaking to anyone. Charles called for his private secretary and legal counsel immediately. His instructions were clear. He wanted a full legal analysis of what was required to remove her titles. He wanted her out of Clarence House within 48 hours, and he wanted a statement prepared explaining why. When advisors suggested this was moving too fast, that perhaps further investigation should precede irreversible action, Charles was immovable. She had admitted substantial concealment of accounts connected to Andrew's problems. That was enough. He would not allow the Crown to be implicated in whatever financial scheme she had been involved in. William was summoned to Clarence House at midnight. He found his father devastated but resolute. Charles told him this was not an emotional reaction despite how it looked. She had created institutional liability through deception, and as king, he could not overlook that regardless of his personal feelings. William agreed that action was necessary, but suggested taking more time for proper legal process. Charles refused. He said every day she remained queen consort, while they knew about this concealment, was another day of institutional dishonesty. It ended now. And here is where we hit a constitutional wall that has not been tested in modern British history. Removing royal titles is not like firing someone from a job. Unlike private citizens who can simply divorce and separate their lives, removing titles from a queen consort required parliamentary action, Privy Council involvement, navigation of constitutional precedent that had rarely been tested and never in circumstances exactly like these. The palace legal team worked through the entire night of November the 28th and into the following day, researching historical precedents. The closest comparison they found was the removal of titles from German relatives of the royal family during the First World War. But those were foreign royals, not a sitting queen consort. There was also the abdication crisis of 1936, when Edward VIII gave up the throne to marry Wallis Simpson. But that was voluntary. Nobody forced Edward out. What Charles wanted, stripping a sitting queen consort of her titles due to financial misconduct, had no direct precedent in modern royal history. They were building the road while driving on it. The legal team determined that several steps were required. Charles needed to formally request Parliament take action through the Home Secretary. The Privy Council would need to advise on the constitutional propriety of such action. Parliament would likely need to pass specific legislation authorizing removal of the titles granted by letters patent upon the marriage of Charles and Camilla. Under normal circumstances, this process could take weeks, months even, but Charles instructed his legal team to invoke emergency procedures, make it clear to parliamentary officials that time was critical, use every available mechanism to accelerate action. His position was that continuing Camilla's title while investigations proceeded would make the Crown complicit in whatever impropriety the accounts represented. Every day of delay was a day of institutional compromise. The emergency Privy Council session convened on November the 30th at Buckingham Palace. Senior government ministers, judges, and royal advisors formed the constitutional body that advises the Crown on matters of highest importance. The meeting was unprecedented in modern times, both for its speed and its subject matter. Palace Council presented the evidence, the undisclosed accounts, the amounts involved, the troubling sources of some funds. Camilla's admission of deliberate concealment. The legal argument was straightforward. Continuation of the Queen Consort title under these circumstances created institutional liability and undermined public trust in the monarchy's financial propriety. Removal of titles was a proportionate response to a serious breach of trust affecting the Crown's reputation. The Privy Council deliberated for hours. Several members expressed concern about the precedent being set and the optics of a king essentially using institutional mechanisms to punish what could be framed as a personal betrayal. But ultimately, the constitutional weight of the king's position prevailed. The Privy Council advised that parliamentary action to remove the titles would be constitutionally proper given the circumstances presented. Simultaneously, government officials had been briefed. The Prime Minister, after consultation with senior ministers and the leader of the opposition, agreed to introduce emergency legislation that would authorize removal of titles granted to Camilla upon marriage. The speed of this agreement reflected both the gravity of the evidence and the government's desire to support the monarchy through a crisis that could undermine public confidence in the institution. The legislation, drafted overnight and introduced to Parliament on December the 1st, was brief and specific. It authorized removal of the titles Queen Consort, Duchess of Cornwall, and all other titles and styles granted to Camilla Parker Bowles upon her marriage to the then Prince of Wales. The grounds cited were that serious financial irregularities had been discovered that made continuation of said titles inappropriate and potentially damaging to the Crown. Parliamentary debate was limited because of the emergency nature of the legislation, but the discussion that did occur revealed deep division. Some members of Parliament argued this was appropriate accountability for someone who had held public position while concealing substantial wealth. Others suggested it was disproportionate. That financial irregularities could be addressed through legal channels without completely destroying someone's status and titles. A few raised concerns about the precedent of allowing the Crown to use Parliament to punish what might be a personal betrayal dressed in institutional language. The echoes of Henry VIII using Parliament against his wives were not lost on anyone in the chamber, even if nobody said it quite that directly. The vote, held late on December the 2nd, passed with a strong majority but not overwhelming support. The legislation received royal assent immediately. Charles signing away his wife's titles in what palace observers described as the most painful constitutional duty he had ever performed. His personal statement, released alongside the parliamentary action, was brief. He said it was with profound sadness that he had requested parliamentary action regarding titles held by Camilla Parker Bowles. The discovery of serious financial irregularities and substantial undisclosed accounts had made continuation of the Queen Consort title untenable. This action was taken to protect the integrity of the Crown. Not out of personal vindictiveness, but as necessary institutional preservation. He asked for privacy as he worked through what he described as a personally devastating but institutionally necessary decision. Camilla's response came through lawyers rather than a personal statement. It challenged the characterization of the accounts as misconduct and reserved all legal rights to contest the removal of titles. But legally, once Parliament had acted and the king had signed, the titles were gone. Camilla Parker Bowles was no longer Queen Consort, no longer Duchess of Cornwall, no longer anything but a private citizen whose marriage to the king continued in name only while effectively destroyed in every meaningful sense. Now, I want you to think about something that most coverage of this story completely ignores: the constitutional precedent. What happened here was not just a royal scandal, it was a constitutional innovation. The king used Parliament to strip titles from his own wife. That mechanism now exists. That precedent is now set. And the implications extend far beyond this particular marriage. Constitutional scholars immediately began debating whether this was appropriate use of Crown and Parliament cooperation or a dangerous precedent that could be abused. Think about it this way. If a sitting monarch can request emergency legislation to remove titles from a consort based on financial misconduct, what else could that mechanism be used for? Could a future king or queen use Parliament to punish a family member who embarrassed the institution? Could political disagreements within the royal family be weaponized through constitutional channels? The guardrails that prevented abuse of this mechanism were not legal. They were conventional, based on tradition, based on the assumption that no monarch would use parliament this way. And now that assumption is gone. This is the part of the story that will matter 50 years from now, long after the details of Swiss bank accounts and Luxembourg shell companies have faded from public memory. The mechanism that was created to solve this specific crisis will outlive the crisis itself, and whether that mechanism is used wisely or recklessly in the future depends entirely on the character of whoever wears the crown. The public reaction split along lines that revealed deep divisions in British society. Older citizens, particularly those who remembered the Diana years and Camilla's long and painful rehabilitation, expressed complicated sympathy. Many felt Charles had acted too harshly, that financial irregularities, however serious, did not warrant complete destruction of someone who had finally earned public acceptance after decades of hostility. Online forums filled with people defending Camilla, suggesting she was being made a scapegoat, arguing that hidden accounts were bad but not catastrophic enough to justify this level of punishment. But younger demographics, particularly those focused on accountability and transparency, supported the king's action more strongly. They viewed the hidden millions as a fundamental betrayal, particularly offensive given the monarchy's reliance on public funding and the recent legislative push for financial transparency. The fact that Camilla had concealed substantial wealth while the nation struggled through economic hardship created anger that went beyond sympathy for her personal situation. Gen Z especially saw this through the lens of institutional accountability. If you receive public money, your finances should be public. Full stop. Hidden offshore accounts were not a gray area. They were a disqualifier. International reaction was equally divided. American media, never entirely comfortable with Camilla, given the enduring power of the Diana narrative, framed the scandal as vindication of long-standing doubts about her character. European outlets, more familiar with royal financial scandals across the continent, treated it as serious but not unprecedented. Commonwealth nations watched nervously, concerned that instability at the heart of the monarchy could affect their own constitutional arrangements. Australia's Republican movement immediately seized on the scandal as evidence that hereditary institutions were inherently prone to exactly this kind of abuse. The financial investigation, rather than concluding with the title removal, intensified once the story became public. Additional information began emerging from people who had had dealings with the offshore accounts. Several British businessmen came forward admitting they had made payments to entities connected to Camilla's accounts. They described these payments as charitable contributions or business consultancy fees, but investigators suspected they were disguised influence payments. The most troubling revelations concerned the timing of deposits relative to royal events and decisions. Analysis showed that significant payments had arrived in Camilla's accounts within weeks of her hosting events, attended by wealthy individuals or following her advocacy for certain causes that benefited specific industries. While no direct quid pro quo has been proven, the pattern suggested at minimum the appearance of pay for access arrangements, and in the world of institutional reputation, appearance matters as much as proof. The perception of corruption can be as damaging as corruption itself. Camilla's children from her first marriage, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, mounted a vigorous public defense of their mother. In a joint statement, they insisted she had been trying to help Prince Andrew through impossible financial situations, that her concealment had been motivated by a desire to protect Charles from having to know about or participate in difficult family bailouts, that she had never used her position for personal enrichment. The defense was heartfelt, but it was undermined by the sheer sophistication of the structures used to conceal the money. If you are simply trying to help a family member through a rough patch, you do not need shell companies in Luxembourg. You do not need accounts in the Cayman Islands layered through British Virgin Islands corporate entities. You do not need a financial structure that takes forensic accountants weeks to untangle. That level of architecture suggests planning that goes far beyond a family favor. For Charles personally, the aftermath was devastating in ways that went beyond the public scandal. He had spent nearly 50 years loving Camilla. He had endured enormous public hostility to be with her. He had fought for her acceptance as his wife and eventually as his queen. He had made her rehabilitation one of the defining projects of his life. To discover that throughout their marriage, she had been concealing financial arrangements connected to his most problematic family member felt like a betrayal that transcended financial impropriety. It raised fundamental questions about whether he had ever truly known his wife. Those close to Charles reported he aged visibly in the days following the title removal. He continued to perform his duties, attending meetings, reading government boxes, fulfilling ceremonial obligations, but the engagement that had always characterized his approach to kingship was gone. He moved through everything with mechanical precision, present in body but absent in spirit. He could not remain at Clarence House, the home so connected to his life with Camilla, and relocated to apartments at Buckingham Palace that he had previously avoided as too formal and too cold. The irony was not lost on him. He was living in the palace that symbolized the crown he had chosen to protect, sleeping in rooms he had always disliked, having sacrificed the domestic life he had fought so hard to build. William's position was complicated by his need to support his father while managing his own expanding responsibilities as heir apparent. He issued a public statement supporting the king's decision as institutionally necessary. Privately, he struggled with the precedent. If the king could strip titles from a queen consort for financial misconduct, what message did that send about royal marriages? About the permanence of positions earned through decades of service? About whether any title was truly secure? These were not academic questions for William. They were questions about the institution he would one day lead and the rules that would govern his own family's place within it. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, found herself thrust into a role she had never expected to occupy quite so soon. With Camilla removed from public life, Catherine became the senior female royal, supporting the king, taking on patronages and responsibilities she had anticipated having years more to prepare for. Those close to her described her as rising to the challenge, while privately concerned about the toll the scandal was taking on Charles and on the institution itself. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the monarchy's survival depended not just on surviving individual crises, but on maintaining the appearance of stability, even when everything behind the walls was in chaos. There were also uncomfortable questions about what Charles had known and when. The investigation found no evidence he had been aware of the hidden accounts before November of 2025. But some observers suggested it strained credibility that Camilla had managed such extensive financial concealment for decades without any warning signs whatsoever. 20 years of marriage, living in the same house, sharing financial advisors and accountants at the household level, and he never noticed anything. The question of whether Charles might have willfully ignored suspicions to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths lingered in a way that no official denial could fully resolve. As December continued, the scandal showed no signs of fading. New revelations emerged regularly, each one either making Camilla's actions look more calculated and Charles's response more justified, or making the punishment seem increasingly disproportionate to the offense. Depending entirely on your perspective and your priors about the monarchy itself. So let me now close the loops I opened at the beginning and tell you what I think this really means. The hidden accounts were real. Nearly £9 million across Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Luxembourg. They were not forgotten family money. They were actively maintained for over 2 decades. The connection to Prince Andrew's financial troubles was confirmed by Camilla herself during the confrontation at Clarence House, though whether her version of events is the full truth remains unclear. The constitutional mechanism used to strip her titles was unprecedented and creates a precedent whose implications will unfold for decades. And Charles made a choice that defined his reign in the most painful way possible. He chose the institution over the woman he loved. Here is my analysis, and you can disagree with me on this. I think history will judge this moment as the point where the modern monarchy finally accepted that transparency is not optional. For centuries, royal finances existed in a zone of deliberate obscurity. The monarch's wealth, the family's assets, the flow of money between private and public roles, all of it was kept deliberately vague because vagueness served the institution. It prevented exactly this kind of scandal by making sure nobody could ever prove exactly what was happening. The 2025 transparency legislation ended that era, and Camilla became the first casualty of the new rules. Not because she was uniquely corrupt, but because she was the one whose secrets were structured in ways that an audit could detect. I suspect, and this is speculation clearly marked as such, that the full accounting of royal financial arrangements across the entire family would produce revelations that would make Camilla's accounts look modest. She was not caught because she was the worst offender. She was caught because she was the one whose concealment was sophisticated enough to leave a traceable trail. The deeper tragedy here is personal. Charles spent his entire adult life choosing between duty and love. He chose love with Camilla in defiance of his family, of public opinion, of the institution itself. And then he was forced to choose duty over love, in the most brutal way imaginable. Publicly stripping titles from the woman he adored, ending a marriage that had defined his emotional life, sitting alone in Buckingham Palace in apartments he never wanted, having destroyed everything personal that mattered to him to protect something institutional that he had sworn to serve. Was it the right choice? I think so. I think a monarchy that cannot hold its own members accountable for financial deception has no moral authority to exist as a public institution in the 21st century. But being right and being at peace are two very different things. And for Charles, sitting in those cold rooms while the woman he trusted most lives under a legal cloud, the cost of being right is measured in something that no constitutional analysis can capture. The monarchy survives. It always does. But what Charles lost can never be restored. And the precedent he set will echo through every royal marriage, every family dispute, every financial arrangement for generations to come. He did not just end a marriage. He rewrote the rules for every king and queen who will follow him. If that is not the loneliest thing a person can do, I do not know what is.